At least 240 people have been killed since President Pierre Nkurunziza announced his intention to extend his term in office in April to a third term. More than 210,000 people have fled the country since then. This past week saw violence in Burundi escalating, posing a threat to the country's stability. The UN Security Council has commented that Burundi is at a critical juncture and a deep political crisis. We are now joined in studio by Richard Challen. He is a project coordinator at Good Governance Africa. Richard, thank you very much for being with us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
It is said that people are killed execution style. I mean, it's that dramatic. Some say it's still the aftermath of elections. Others are saying it's ethnically motivated. What's really happening in Burundi?
Well, we have to go back. I think in order to really understand, we have to go back into history. We go back to the historical thing. We remember that in the early 90s to late 2005, there was a civil war going on, and that was along ethnic lines and things like that. And then Pierre Nkurunziza was elected as president then, after the peace accord was signed, and then he stayed on for 2 terms. But since the Burundian, during the peace accord, one of the requirements was that the president had a 2 terms limit. And yet in 2015, Pierre Nkurunziza, based on a technicality, decided to go for a 3rd term. And that caused a lot of problems and riots, and people were against it. And this led to suppression by the police and things. And remember the attempted coup as well. And from then on, things have just escalated into violence in Burundi.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen that the President Pierre Nkurunziza has now, I think he's put Saturday as a deadline, which is tomorrow, for illegal guns to be set aside and to be handed over. What happens thereafter? What's going to happen?
Well, it was last week as well. He said that he gave an amnesty period for the fighters. And after that, he said there shall be no hold bars. It's going to be cracked down to full effect, even to the effect that now there have been inflammatory rhetoric used by his politicians that are saying that, we are going to crack down on his opponents and we're going to spare no one. Yeah. Whoever is going to have a weapon is going to be considered an enemy of the state.
Yeah, I mean, we were reporting in the news yesterday, and it's been said that President Barack Obama actually phoned President Jacob Zuma to say that the situation is horrendous. In fact, he said that he phones with a deep concern and asked our president to work with other leaders to resolve this. What did you make of this phone call?
Well, firstly, it highlights the danger, the escalation of violence, the dangerous situation, the crisis, I would say, not only in Burundi but in the surrounding regions. We know that there is worry that there might be a repeat of the Rwandan genocide, and that's always at the back of the international community's mind. However, here we are more sensitized to it, and the whole world is watching closely and would not want a repeat of that. So I think that's why President Barack Obama phoned our President Jacob Zuma to come to some sort of agreement. Like yesterday, I think the UN passed a resolution. And the UN Council sat and they passed a resolution that they're going to put measures against, Pierre Nkurunziza, that he needs to come to the table and settle this conflict.
I mean, is by phoning our President Jacob Zuma, I mean, does he have any control whatsoever? I mean, would he be able to negotiate? What's his role in all of this?
Well, the UN and the AU actually, they chose Museveni, the Ugandan president, to be the mediator between the Burundian government and the opposition to sit at the table. But I think that South Africa has a role to play. I think we are a major player. Like we know, we've been in negotiations and we've sent in peace negotiations on the continent. If you remember, even in the Burundian Accord, it was Nelson Mandela who actually, were part of the Arusha Accord, peace accords, and that in 2005 and so in 2003 actually. So South Africa is a major player, and I think we do have a role that we can play in negotiating.
Now, I believe that France also has asked for the UN Security Council to actually send in an army. Have we reached that stage?
Well, France has drafted a resolution that, as I mentioned, and it was passed yesterday, that the UN accepted. They accepted the resolution. And actually the UN, the EU, the European Union and the AU have actually called for a meeting of the Burundian government and the opposition, but they also keep their East African standby force just in case they should send them to the country.
Yeah. Because
one UN representative in Burundi have said that they do not have enough forces to prevent a massacre of the violence, the intensity that happened in '94, because they are lacking in personnel there. So that's why they're keeping East African standby force, and also peacekeepers from the Congo are on standby just to be deployed to Burundi if the violence escalates to a higher level.
So that's that African force that's standing.
Yes.
It's standing in the wings waiting.
Yeah.
If anything.
So we do
happen.
have people waiting, like just in case to be sent through.
But what role would they play, since these raids are said to be really carried out by the government themselves?
Well, firstly, peacekeeping I think is really necessary in any conflict. In any conflict, peacekeeping, we have to go there and settle the peace first. Have to keep the peace down before we can actually get to an agreement. We have to stop the violence, and I think this is the role of the peacekeepers, to go and prevent, because it's violence both on the government side and the militias, and which we do really need peacekeeping to settle the situation and order before we can actually bring the actors to the table and form a peace agreement kind of thing.
Let's start wrapping up, but let's talk about these meetings, bringing people to the table. This was done before the elections, and yet they didn't seem to yield any results. What does this country need? What needs to be done?
Firstly, I think I believe that the government needs to be realistic, that Nkurunziza at the moment, he is turning a deaf ear on everything. He doesn't want to step down, and I think it's time for his government to take responsibility and ask him to step down, I think, because if somebody is not willing to come to the table, then there is no solution. There cannot be a solution. And I think it's time for the government to actually step up and actually make something out of it, because it has to come from the party itself, because who else can do that besides his own party, kind of, And it will take some responsibility and accountability on the side of his government.
All right, let's leave it there for this morning. Thank you for talking to us. Richard Chellan, he is the project coordinator at Good Governance Africa, talking to us about the situation that's currently underway when 240 people being killed since President Pierre Nkurunziza announced his intention to extend his term in office. This, of course, is seeing the escalation in Burundi. Thank you again for joining us.